Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring Space, the Final Frontier. Volume 1. No Stars Land by William Morrison. Mind Worms by Moses Schere. The Beasts in the Void by Paul W. Fairman. The Planet of Illusion by Donald A. Wollheim. Cogito, Ergo Sum by John Foster West. No Stars Land by Joseph Samuelson, writing as William Morrison. Originally published in Fantastic Universe, July 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. It was ridiculous and incredible. It was against all reason. But it had happened. The ship was marooned in free space. They had been squabbling again, and this time the arguments on both sides had become as hot as the 2 blazing stars which hemmed them in on both sides, making them feel like dust motes in a vacuum. Karin, her eyes darting sparks, had summed it up neatly. "It's hopeless, Jan. Only a divorce can solve it." "I can't think of anything I want more," Jan said, his face tight with anger. By the light of the green star which illuminated his features, he must have made, he realized bitterly, a ghastly picture. Karin regarded him with distaste. "Fine, splendid. The minute we get back to Earth." "Why wait that long?" Jan protested. "There's a court on Ganymede. We can get one there." He was bitterly contemplating the ruin of his honeymoon when he noticed that the ship had lost headway. The differential screen, which depicted the change in the star picture from second to second, was barely illuminated. They were practically stationary with respect to every star in the local galaxy. In view of the fact that they had been travelling at 1/2 light speed, and that neither the green nor the yellow star was more than 35 million miles away, the result seemed to Jan outrageous. The positions of both stars should have been changing rapidly. His first thought was that the differential screen was no longer working. Both stars, however, were stationary on the direct view screen as well, glowing with unsurpassed steadiness and filling the space around them with a flood of radiance. The direct view screen was plainly operating properly. Somehow, the unwilling conclusion forced itself upon him that they had been braked to a stop. Karin noticed his agitation and demanded, "What's wrong?" And then she stared herself, realizing what had happened. Her lips trembled, and she gave a startled exclamation. "But that's impossible!" "Of course it's impossible," he agreed, the green and yellow beams cascading over his face as he crossed to the other side of the ship. "Not only that we should have decelerated so rapidly, but that we failed to notice what was happening. I remember that it was just a half-hour ago that I checked the screens, and you made that brilliant remark about my ability as a navigator." His tone made clear all over again how much he had resented her criticism. "We were going full speed, over 90,000 miles a second on initial drive alone. 30 minutes later, our velocity is reduced to 0. The differential screen, he noted, was now completely dark. "We've been subjected on an average to a negative acceleration of 50 miles per second, he went on quickly. "More than 7,000 gravs. It should have torn both us and the ship apart. But the ship shows no strain, and we haven't felt a thing." There was a moment's silence. Then Karen said huskily, "Our instruments are all wrong." "They're not," Jan insisted. "A direct view through the visiplates proves they're not." Karen didn't reply, and he added angrily, "Go ahead and say it again. You're thinking it anyway. I'm a lousy navigator. I'm the one who insisted on passing between the stars." "I wasn't thinking that at all," she said slowly. "I was wondering, what could have caused this to happen? Offhand, I couldn't even make a reasonable guess. Shall we try using our power?" "What would be the use?" Jan said. "Even with a degravitizer on to protect us, we can't get up more than 100 Gs. We can't overcome a reverse acceleration of 7,000. "Suppose we reverse direction?" Jan nodded and said, "We'll try that." Slowly and carefully he swung the ship around and began to build up speed. The maneuver claimed his full attention, giving him no time to look at Karen and wonder whether or not she was frightened. It was a stupid situation to be caught in, and from beginning to end Jan had no one to blame but himself. It was a few years before that intergalactic exploration had started a new practice, thought up apparently by some elderly Romeo in his second childhood. It was a special service for honeymooners. What did honeymooners, from time immemorial, want for themselves? Privacy, isolation, freedom from intrusion by the outside world. What did Intergalactic have to offer the intrepid volunteers who did its exploration? Just that, complete privacy in space. It was all in the way you looked at it. The isolation most people hated was precisely what the honeymooners sought. It had seemed like a bright idea to combine a boon to the honeymooners with a favor to Intergalactic. Intergalactic had offered ships, shiny, beautiful ships of the latest exploratory model, capable of a subspeed of half light, and for stellar travel with a secondary range up to 100 light years. Each was completely supplied with food and furnished with all the gadget that made shipboard housekeeping a pleasure. And all this was free of charge to properly trained couples possessed of a reasonable mental stability and a suitably technical background. There was no salary, of course. After all, the ship itself was reward enough. In return, each couple was given a restricted section of a galaxy to explore. The task was not difficult. Professional explorers could have carried out their assignments in 3 months. The honeymoon couples were allowed twice that time. As the man who had suggested the idea observed, their scientific interests were likely to be somewhat impaired for a short period, and they might be expected to waste many hours in non-productive pursuits. If they hadn't been so much in love with each other, Jan and Karen wouldn't have been such fools as to take on a double assignment. They had accepted a sector of twice the usual size, and they had explored it well, but in a leisurely fashion. A year had passed, and in that year they had learned to know each other too well. It was too long to be together, isolated from the rest of the human race. Even for honeymooners, far too long. Jan was aware of every one of Karen's weaknesses, and he realized only too well that she was aware of his. They had, moreover, developed new weaknesses they had never before exhibited: stubbornness, impatience, a tendency to find incessant fault. These were the beginning of a process of falling out of love. In Karen's eyes, he knew he was no longer the tall, self-reliant man in whose slightly ugly face she had found the good looks that appealed to her. And to Jan, Karen was no longer the warm-hearted, pretty girl who, he had been so pleasantly surprised to learn, was so ready to understand him. During the past month, they had become bored with each other. During the past week, they had been in an almost continuous state of open hostility. It was the desire to keep their trip from dragging out even more intolerably that had induced Jan to take a shortcut. The most direct path home lay between the yellow and green stars, bright twins which were separated from each other by a distance of 40 million miles. Each star was of the same approximate sun mass, and the radiation was strong. But their radiation shield was effective. Their possible acceleration, along with the momentum they had already acquired, should have been sufficient to keep them from falling victim to either star. All that was needed was a steady hand at the controls. With careful navigation, they should have been able to pass midway between the two massive bodies without suffering any ill effects. Karen, whether from caution or from a mere feeling of opposition to everything that Jan suggested, had vigorously opposed the idea. She preferred to swing wide of both stars, even though it meant a serious time loss, not so much because of the added mileage, but because of the need for transverse acceleration, followed by careful manoeuvring to get back to their course again. But her opposition hadn't been quite vigorous enough, and Jan had succeeded in winning her over. They had never expected what happened next. Their path had neatly bisected the line joining the two stars, and they had begun to put both glowing masses behind them. Unexpectedly, as if they had reached the end of a great rubber band to which they had been attached, they had stopped dead in space. The rubber had stretched as much as it was ever going to stretch. Then, as Jan reversed direction, it seemed as if the band were contracting once more. They picked up speed, and the differential screen glowed green and yellow, while their position with respect to the twin stars underwent a change. But the glow quickly dimmed and vanished. Once more they had come to a full stop. "Road blocked at both ends," said Jan with grim finality. "Suppose we cut off at right angles," suggested Karen. "Naturally," he agreed. "We can't afford to miss a bet." "But the road was blocked above and below as well," Jan said. "I'm afraid, darling, that our divorce is going to be held up." "Indefinitely." She looked a little pale and frightened. Even the ghastly lighting could not conceal the beauty in her face, and at that moment he loved her again. He said, "Go ahead and say it. Tell me I should have listened to you. It's true, you know." "I'm not reproaching you, Jan," she said quietly. "Don't joke about it. It's too serious." "We're unharmed. We should be thankful for that, I guess." "How long will we be safe? We can't move." "Strictly speaking," he said, "we can. We can't get away, but we can wriggle around a bit. Apparently we can travel a few million miles in any direction perpendicular to the line joining the stars. We could probably also travel directly toward either star, although I'd hate to get any closer to them. Unfortunately, the stars won't let us get away." "Are you sure it's the stars? There might be planets with intelligent living creatures on them." "That's out," said Jan firmly. "Take a look at some of the three-dimensional views I snapped, both as we approached and as we were wriggling around. Taking all the pictures into consideration, I must have covered all the space for at least 1 billion miles from either star. There are no planets." Together they stared at the photographs. Karen suggested, "Let's put the pictures under the analyzer." They did. The analyzer showed an asteroid belt 400 million miles out from the center of the double star system. But none of the asteroids was apparently more than 5 miles in diameter. "No planets," Jana reiterated. "And if there are any living creatures on those asteroids, I doubt whether they'd be close enough to affect us. It's pretty obvious that the forces holding us together come from the stars themselves."
"Then you think the forces are natural? I've never heard of anything of the kind before."
"The forces would have to be natural."
"How about living things on the stars themselves?" asked Karen.
"I don't believe it. Not for a moment. I know there's been talk about flame creatures living at temperatures of millions of degrees centigrade, but nobody has ever met them."
"Jan, what do we do?"
"You tell me. We have an excellent radiation shield system, but we can't keep it going indefinitely, and sooner or later our food concentrates will run out."
"So we're stuck here, hopelessly marooned."
"Right. Too bad we're so bored with each other." Karen said nothing, and once more Jan turned to the controls, hoping against hope. But no matter in which direction he made his attempt, the ship was quickly brought up short. The rubber band had not weakened. The hours passed, while the two stars continued to blaze at them, watchful and unwinking. Jan adjusted the radiation controls, permitting some of the heat that escaped direct reflection from the polished sides to get past the shielding screen and warm the ship. On the whole, as it took some of the load from the screen and lengthened the system's useful life, it was a wise move. But it did make the ship uncomfortable. Karen, he noted, was bearing up well. There were no complaints from her, and it was she who suggested that they put themselves on emergency rations. It was at the end of 30 hours of their strange imprisonment that they began to be aware of dangers other than those from radiation and hunger. Both the green star and the yellow, as Jan had observed, possessed fairly small coronas. Quite unexpectedly, the green star flared up, and tongues of garish flame licked out for a distance of several million miles. Its action set off a silent uproar in space. The yellow star answered with flame of its own, and Jan was forced to get in onto the act and turn on his radiation shields at full capacity. A half-hour later, both coronas subsided to normal, and he cut down his shield capacity once more. "It's damnably disturbing," said Jan. "If only natural forces are involved, why should one star reply to the other in such deliberate fashion?"
"Perhaps the green star set the other one off, like a neutron from an exploding atom setting off the next atom," Karen suggested.
"Or perhaps there are living creatures on them," Jan muttered.
Karen said, "It's beginning to seem possible, and I'm afraid that if we stay here long enough, we'll find out."
"I'm afraid so too," Jan conceded. "We both wanted living companions, but not unknown shapes of fire." 17 hours after the end of the corona explosions, they noticed activity on the yellow star. What took place resembled the formation of sunspots, but the eruptions were like none they had ever seen. As they grew, they darkened and began to rotate with increasing speed, so that soon the surface of the yellow star was covered with black whirling specks. The specks drew together and then shot out abruptly toward the green star. Once more Jan acted. As the black objects raced toward him, he sent the ship full speed ahead to get out of their way, and as he did so, the now elongated spheres of spinning blackness sailed straight past the ports. They were in the vacuum of space, but even so Jan noted that the ship rocked as if battered by the waves of an ocean. From the green star came answering black objects, which grew like sinister soap bubbles. The bubbles caught the attacking spheres, and wherever defenders and attackers made contact, a blinding flash of light was followed by a quick burst of high-energy radiation. "Rule out natural forces," said Jan decisively.
Karen nodded. "Each star is either alive or has living things on it. They're fighting a war." She repeated the word. "A war! It seems incredible, terrifying."
"I'm afraid you've forgotten our own past. Haven't you studied your history? We had wars once, too."
"But so long ago, Jan. It seems impossible to believe that half the human race ever tried to destroy the other half."
"Well, they didn't succeed. There's no use moralizing. Now, at least, we have something pretty definite to go on. When the creatures of one star launched a force field, those of the other star defended themselves with a force field of their own. Directly between the stars, the fields balanced pretty well, permitting us to move, but toward the rim of the region where they collide, the forces work in the same direction and keep us from breaking free."
"Now that we know that, what can we do?"
"Nothing, I'm afraid," admitted Jan. "Neither star will relax its field for fear of falling victim to the other. That leaves us in the middle, exactly as before." He said thoughtfully, "Karen, did I ever tell you of that ancient history book I once saw? It actually depicted our barbaric ancestors on a battlefield. There were long rows of trenches on either side, apparently as a protection from the primitive missiles they were capable of launching. And sitting on the blackened limb of a tree that had been shot almost to bits, in what was called no man's land, sat a bird. Well, we're that bird, Karen, on a battlefield we never made. We're right in the middle, in no star's land. And sooner or later, some of the weapons being used are going to finish us off, precisely as one of those ancient shells was sure eventually to destroy the bird."
"I didn't realize I had married a philosopher," said Karen sharply. "If the bird had any brains, it would have flown away. And if we have any brains, we'd find a way to move the ship."
"We seem to lack the necessary mental equipment," said Jan tartly. "What would you suggest?"
"That we go over the entire ship, make an inventory of all our instruments and resources, and see if we can use them to get us out of here. Once we're headed for home, we can philosophize as much as we please."
"You're right, of course," said Jan. "I don't see what we can possibly do on an effective scale. But let's go." They put on a great show of activity, cataloguing the different varieties of storage products, instruments, and fuel. The list, Jan pointed out, was not impressive. "We could, if we had the proper equipment, convert all our atomic fuel into a bomb," he said. "What effect that would have on a star that can radiate 1 billion times as much energy as we could throw at it, I don't know. I do know that it would leave us without fuel."
"And the creatures themselves? If there are any, how about them? Would they be destroyed?"
"They're used to tremendous gravity, incredible pressures, and temperatures way up in the millions," Jan said. "Maybe the only way to harm them would be to lower those high values. That overgrown corona we saw might have been a pressure reducer. The black things were probably heat absorbers."
"Our radiation shield," suggested Karen eagerly.
"Something like that might do the trick, if it were 1 trillion times as large. It would absorb the energy they need and scatter it as low-frequency radiation. But a small shield system like this one wouldn't amount to more than a single drop of water thrown on a fire. We're too small, Karen. On this battlefield, we're outclassed."
"Then all we can do is wait to be picked off."
"I'm sorry, Karen. If I have to go, this isn't the way I'd like it to end. I dreamed of sacrificing my life for you, so that you'd always remember me as a man of courage and integrity. As it is," he shrugged.
"Don't be silly," said Karen, moved in spite of herself. "I have no desire to outlive you."
They were reduced to waiting again. Jan wondered whether, in all the time they had hovered between the opposing battle lines, the star-dwellers had been conscious of their existence.
even whether they had spared the time to note the birds so hopelessly trapped on the battlefield. Each side, if it was alert of its enemy's moves, must have recorded the ship's presence, and possibly speculated on what it was doing in this section of space. When the surface of the green star began to heave, Jan returned to his controls again, ready to maneuver out of the way of whatever weapon might be used. But this time, apparently, the change on the green star presaged no attack. A section of the surface moved slowly out, and then broke up into wriggling fragments that exhibited a peculiar order. Curiously, the figures reminded him of some of the primitive alphabets of early human civilization. "Skywriting!" exclaimed Karin. "Space writing," he corrected. "Intended for us or for the enemy?" "Not for us. They must realize we can't read it." "That's right. But if it's for them, it may be a suggestion for a truce." "Whatever it is, the yellow star's not answering," said Karin anxiously. "Give them time, Karin. They have to make up their minds." An hour later, the light from the yellow star died slowly away, and its size shrank. Then the star blazed up again and expanded to twice its previous diameter. As the yellow star swept through the phases of its powerful pulsation, Jan felt as if every bone and muscle of his body was in the grip of a giant hand, being twisted and wrenched without mercy. Karin's body stiffened, and he heard her cry out. The next moment her body crumpled, and she sagged to the deck in a dead faint. Jan started to crawl toward her, felt the giant hand close on his own brain, and blacked out. When Jan awoke again, both stars seemed normal once more, blazing as steadily as when he had first seen them. Karin was awake too, sitting up with her hands pressed to her temples. "Truce rejected," Jan said bitterly. "They don't care what happens to the bird on the battlefield, apparently." "Perhaps we should edge closer to the one that wanted the truce," Karin whispered shakily. Jan shook his head. "Let's not give either side the idea that we have any sympathies at all. Taking sides in a fight too big for us is a sure way to commit suicide." His lips tightened. "We'd better get as far away as we can from both of them without using up too much of our fuel fighting their force fields. That at least will spare our radiation shield from too much strain." "I still think we should get closer to the green one. At least its creatures aren't as bloodthirsty as the other appears to be." "Neither one is bloodthirsty, just flame-thirsty," said Jan grimly. "And personally, I wouldn't trust the green sun as far as I could throw it." The uneasy silence of space surrounded them again. Green star and yellow star shone quietly, their coronas as thin and bright as supernatural halos. Small sunspots whirled on their surfaces, as they did on the surface of every well-behaved star of reasonably large mass, and within the ship Jan and Karin waited with dread impatience for the next move in the unearthly war. Jan tried to occupy himself by arranging the data of the systems they had surveyed, but most of the work had been done long before. There were several thousand tiny spool books, part of the ship's standard supply, which neither of them had as yet touched, but unfortunately he wasn't interested in reading. If there had been something important to discuss, they would have spoken to each other, but they had long since passed the stage where small talk was possible. Even their meals, which on Earth might have dragged out pleasantly for an hour or two, were here of little value in killing time. Synthetics took only a few seconds to prepare, and no more than a few minutes to eat. Besides, they were on short rations. They had long used up the small supply of alcoholic drinks with which a thoughtful intergalactic supplied its vessels in order to ease the strain that might be expected at first between two comparative strangers thrown into such close intimacy for the first time in their lives. There was nothing for it but to remain sober. All the same, there came a time when Jan began to wonder if he might not be drunk after all, his mind thrown hideously off balance by the strange forces to which they had been subjected. The things he saw had a nightmare aspect which chilled him to the core of his being. But Karen saw them too. The yellow star was undergoing a change in shape. Slowly it was becoming longer and narrower, both ends maintaining the same distance from the green star. When a constriction appeared in the middle, it looked for all the world like a super-amoeba beginning to undergo mitosis, and he wondered if it was going to split, like the amoeba, into two bodies. But the process came to a halt when the star had assumed the shape of a huge diabolical dumbbell, two great spheres of flame held together by a narrow connecting link, a mere 200,000 miles in diameter. The green star began to reply. It too grew longer, but the shape became that of a super spindle. The middle thickened, the ends sharpened. Jan became aware of currents of flame that raced from one end out into space, and then around to the other end, where they were absorbed into the body of the star again. Two fantastic cosmic fences were about to clash, one assuming the position of attack, the other apparently putting itself on guard. "Wonder when the fun begins," Jan muttered. "It won't be fun for us," said Karen grimly, her hands clenched in sudden fury. "If we could only do something, instead of just standing here helpless, like... "A bird on a battlefield," said Jan helpfully. "But we've already gone over that, haven't we? They're too big for us. They have all the material advantages. They—" He broke off abruptly, his eyes narrowing. Startled, Karen waited for him to continue in sudden desperate hope. "Material advantages," he went on slowly. "Yes, they have them. But spiritually, or rather mentally, we're in the same boat. I think we can make something of that." "I don't understand you," said Karen. "I mean that they're as ignorant of us as we are of them. Perhaps they're even more ignorant. They know that we're small and incapable of applying a force that could break out of the field surrounding us. They know we haven't been harmed by anything they've thrown at each other, so far. But I'll bet they can't examine the inside of this ship. I'll bet they can't tell what we look like, what intelligence we have. We know some of the things they can do, although not all. We know something of the fields of force they can exert, and we know that they must be creatures so different from us that any strange behavior on our part will seem to them potentially dangerous." "You're philosophizing again," said Karen in disgust. "No, I'm analyzing. Their ignorance of us will be our weapon. We're small, but there's no evidence we can't harm them. An atomic bomb is small too, and we're in a favorable psychological position. They're busy watching each other, waiting for each other's moves, with the initiative apparently on the side of the yellow star. If we act in any way to upset the present near balance, they'll take us seriously. We may be the straw that breaks the camel's back, the tiny force that tips the balance one way or another." "It's absurd," said Karen. "We're too small. We aren't big enough to be a straw. We're just a couple of molecules on the straw." "But they don't know that. And even if they suspect it, they can't be sure, because there's one material weapon we have that may be dangerous to them." "Our radiation shield system," Karen gasped. "Exactly. If it's absorbed enough energy, it might upset plans for either attack or defense." "They must know it's too weak to make any difference. If it were really powerful, they'd expect us to have used it before." "No," said Jan. "They probably realize that we use it for just one purpose, to protect ourselves. We mustn't subject it to excess strain. But suppose we're desperate, and decide we're finished anyway. Suppose we make up our minds to take one of our enemies with us. Suppose we try to commit suicide on a really heroic scale." Karen stared at him, her lips whitening.
"If you really want to, Jan."
"I don't want to, but I want them to get that impression. Suppose I aim the ship at the yellow star, start all the motors, and turn on the radiation shield system to the limits of its capacity. Remember the state of uncertainty they're in anyway. What do you think they'll do?"
"I don't know."
"They'll have to do something. They just won't let us plunge into them."
"But what?"
"That," said Jan grimly, "we'll find out. Whatever happens, it'll be better than waiting."
"You said that before when you took a chance passing between the two stars. Don't be in a hurry, Jan."
But Jan was already maneuvering the ship around. The radiation shield was on, and the motors were blasting more and more rapidly. They picked up speed. With grim deliberation, he aimed the nose of the ship at the center of one of the yellow spheres. Swiftly, the yellow dumbbell-shaped star grew in the direct vision plate, spreading a saffron glow over the differential visor. Yellow blotted out all the other colors of space. The vision screen began to glow not only with light, but with a faint heat of its own. But the air in the rest of the ship had become cool. The radiation system was working beautifully, and the creatures on the yellow star must know that. The system would be shattered in the corona, vaporized in the star itself. But what harm might it not do before it died? Jan shivered, without knowing whether it was from the drop in temperature or from the growing fear that was overwhelming him. From the yellow star there came no move. Another few seconds, and the screen would begin to falter and fail. When that happened, it would be too late to reverse the direction of the ship. It would plunge straight into the fiery mass. He turned to Karen and said hoarsely, "I'm sorry, darling. You were right after all. We should have waited."
"No, I couldn't have stood it any longer. It's better this way, Jan."
Something struck the ship a great blow. Something sent them whirling end over end away from the yellow star. With the motors blasting away as strongly as they could, the ship was describing a great erratic arc, like a toy jet set off by a child, and tossed high into the air. But there was no air here, nothing to break the crazy spin. Yellow and green flashed in and out of the viewing screens, fainter and smaller each time. They were being hurled away from the twin stars with a constantly mounting velocity, a terrifying lurching and swaying. Jan began to drag himself toward the controls, saw that Karen had already reached them. The ship was straightening out. At times it wobbled so violently that he was afraid of the strain on the hull. But the wobbling never persisted, always being transformed just in time into another form of erratic spin. Slowly the energy of rotation died away, absorbed by the anti-spin gyroscopes. When they straightened out, they were far past the barrier. 80 million miles separated them from the two stars. Streamers of blackness were shooting from both ends of the green spindle toward the yellow dumbbell, which had contracted sharply in an attempt to defend itself. Jan took a deep breath. "We were lucky," he cried. "They were both under so much tension, they took me seriously. The yellow star diverted some of its forces to defend itself from me, and the green star used the occasion to head off the attack with a counterattack of its own."
"I know,"
Karen breathed. "Shall we wait to see what happens?"
"No, Jan, let's get away fast."
Karen was smiling at him, and Jan could not help smiling back at her. But he was aware of a tenseness of his own as he asked, with seeming casualness, "Still want that divorce?" Karen said slowly. "We've got at least 2 weeks to go before we reach our own system. By that time I'll want it. But don't give it to me. Do you understand, Jan? Whatever happens, refuse me a divorce." "Those are orders?" "Absolute orders. When we land on Earth, I'll take a vacation from you for about a month. After that, we'll spend the rest of our lives together, but always with other people around." "Always?" "Almost always. At moments like this, I admit, other people would be in the way." Green star and yellow star faded into the distance. The bird, thought Jan, had escaped from the battlefield. It was only natural for it to burst into song.
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. Mindworms by Moses Schere. Originally published in Planet Stories, Spring 1948. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The ambassador, whose smile had grown fixed, whose thin, broad-domed face was lined and tired, bowed before the screen, saying, "Thank you, thank you." On Earth, 26 million miles away, 1 billion saw his final bow and cheered him. "Luck! Luck! Luck!" they roared. His screen in his suite on the spaceship Ceres finally went blank, and the voice of the ship's operator cut in nervously. "I'll jibe with the center room beam in a moment, sir." The operator, a capable man, was frightened. The ambassador had more reason to be frightened. He took the moment in which he was unlinked from Earth to wipe one hand nervously down across his face. "On center room, The operator at either end was cut off as the tight official beams met in mid-space. A different voice, older and deep bass, said, "Relax, Phil." The ambassador let his silvery cloak fall from its dramatic sweep about his shoulders and stood naturally, tall, a little stooped, heavy-shouldered, greying in the prime of his life at 75. His screen, which had been flashing to him a montage of the crowds in Times Square, in Trafalgar Square, in the Champ de Mars, in Red Square, filled with a view of Centre Room, from which the earth was governed. The bass voice, backed by a large and friendly smile, belonged to the President, who sat at the head of the great ivory table in the huge soft-lit room. They all were there, the men whom custom deprived of a name when it gave them their titles, the executive secretary, the coordinator for education, the coordinator for energy, the terrestrial and astral coordinators for commerce, and the half-dozen others who possessed the 10-year term. If, privately, they called each other George and Ahmed and Sven, it was for relaxation from the standard of dignity expected of them. At the foot of the table sat a small group of important guests, and all the white, black, yellow, and brown faces were turned to the image of the ambassador, who waited for permission from the Venusians to step upon Venus. "Take it easy, Phil," the president said. The ambassador forced a smile. "Alec, when it's all over, I will." "It can't fail. The very fact that after 50 years of trying they're finally willing to receive an Earthman and will consider trade." The president made a large, gathering gesture. "Everything's in the force field." "For 50 years, he said with the reassurance the ambassador so greatly needed. "We've been dropping them capsules of Earth goods and the means to learn our language. Drop, 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 and we've worn away the stone. Can't fail, Phil." "I know," the ambassador said. He thought, "It isn't that." It was the triple distilled inferiority complex which gripped him and shook him, the dread of the terrible brains below Venus's mist. One by one around the table they gave him brief, friendly Godspeed. The distinguished guests were probably more formal with, "The assembled physicists have asked me to convey to you all our best wishes, Ambassador," and more on that style. He thanked them gravely. One guest, however, distinctly annoyed him. It was Rupert Hogue, the last of the pioneers, that walking fossil from the first days of space travel. "Wide open, Ambassador," he creaked with an antiquarian reference to atom jets and a wave of his one hand that was not formal at all. Otherwise crippled from long-ago radiations was Hogue, but at 140 his one eye was bright. Probably he had not been invited to the gathering, but just had barged in, being one of the half-dozen holders of high privilege, that peculiar, all-inclusive reward for distinguished service. The trouble with Hogue was that he never would confine himself, like a decent old-timer, to remarking on the progress his years had seen. This official farewell had a purpose. The men on Earth, secure and sane, were trying to give one last tenuous thread of security to the very sane, very well-adjusted, on Earth, Ambassador, who in space was ready for a mental crack-up. No psychiatry or long-distance hypnosis had yet prevailed against the rampant inferiority, the primitive and infantile desire to crawl and hide, which came often to Earthmen in the presence of alien, superior races. A foreigner who came to Earth they could respect, and that was all. A foreigner met after a trip through space. They met with their every fear and complex laid naked, perhaps by artificial gravity, by unknown rays, by something. Lampell, the first to make contact with the first unworldly race. Good Lord, Lampell actually had been a contemporary of leering old Hogue there. Had met on Mars a cynical bunch of mental wizards who had had, and still had the most unholy good time with a bumbling Earthman who would dare anything for trade. Of Lampell's crew, 12 out of 40 returned sane, half dead, but sane, and the 12 did not include Lampell, first to set foot on Mars. That had been 80 years ago. 2 other cultures were discovered in the next 30 years, those on Jupiter and upon Saturn's moon Phoebe. Always the first few to expose their naked, terrified minds to a cosmic sophistication met the same fate. There was an old saying which the ambassador now remembered a little too clearly. Crazy as an ambassador. The ambassador jerked his hand away from his face, but all in Centre Room had seen the desperate gesture, made as though one could wipe away fear. "Say, Ambassador," that was old Hogue. "Say, Ambassador, I've been saving up something to tell you." Annoyance ran around the ivory table, but high privilege was high privilege. All Hogue had to tell the public was that the 10-year men hadn't been polite to him. "Say, Ambassador, you know, I had a funny experience once, my first trip to Phoebe. Was the second trip made there, by the way. Mighty funny experience, and it wasn't ever made public, because you know how things were." The old man chuckled rustily. "Nobody wanted to say anything against space travel until all the stock was sold. But I've been saving it up for a time just like this, to tell an ambassador who's on a spot. Been saving up." Hogue's mind seemed to skip, and he banged the table, laughing. "Yes, sir, that was years before the Phoebe and Platinum scandal, and what Rupert Hogue ever had to do with that scandal, I'm not saying." The ambassador said pointedly, "I understand that you were rather fortunate upon Phoebe, Captain Hogue." His voice was unsteady with anger. The president signalled across space, anxiously, that he should please be patient. Hogue, still laughing and shaking his bald, scarred head reminiscently, settled back in his chair of little tension bubbles. "Take a load off your feet, Ambassador, and listen. Wish I could give you a cigar." The ambassador took a load off his feet while the old man lit up in great comfort. As well, the ambassador thought, to bore himself with Hogue while waiting for a Venusian signal as to pace about with jangling nerves. Soothing music, escapist motion pictures he could not listen to or look at, not in the grip of inferiority and fear. Hogue blew a smoke ring. "Those days, a spaceship didn't go much faster than that ring compared to nowadays. You know how we had to do when we'd headed for an outside planet? Took off in the direction of the Earth's revolution so our speed would be greater than Earth's, and we'd tend to spiral away from the sun, and we'd have to take a gravity pull off a planet here and a gravity pull off a planet there to detour us wherever we wanted to go. Many the ship missed connections, or with the metal of those days she blew her tubes away, and she's out there yet and in orbit, just a coffin. Or those that first tried for Venus but went into the sun. A lot of good friends of mine, Ambassador." The old man stared bleakly ahead of him for a moment. "And of course, there was just the radar that never could follow you much beyond 5 million miles. I was the first one to circle the moon, you know," he put in with senile pride. "Repaired a jet in mid-course. My hand came off a month later. But, as I was saying, this was on the way to Phoebe, and about a month out." The old man finally dug into his story, and as he warmed up to it, so did his listeners, although with a kind of self-apology for being interested in one of those gaudy old adventure yarns of the time when the long ships had to stand on their tails to blast off the earth. They'd wobble up on polymerized liquid fuel, not daring to start the atom blast till they were well beyond the atmosphere, then jerk away at the heads of their beautiful, wasteful, fiery trains. Even the early atom drive required conservation, so that it was necessary to take those long leapfrog curves from gravity field to gravity field, during which, as the ship coasted, its blast-eroded tube liners would be replaced. The Lone Star, Hogue's ship, he was an unregenerate Texan, had to cut her drive on one of these occasions. A number of her crew, in shielded, clumsy spacesuits, were at work at the stern upon those terrifically radioactive liners, while they hoped for the best. Her primitive screens picked up some approaching objects, and in a little while the great worms, almost as long as the 500-foot ship, faintly glowing, swam into plain view against the backdrop of illimitable stars. "Worms," Hogue repeated, waving his cigar. "Space worms." They were perhaps 10 times as long as they were thick, blunt-ended, with a cluster of tentacles at each end and another cluster belting them in the middle, all the tentacles gently moving and apparently propelling them. They were covered, including the tentacles, with a crystalline shell that had no visible opening, but there was an eye that swam under this shell anywhere along the body. What metabolic process they sustained in space could not be said. It probably was similar to that of the solar nautilus, which floats in great colonies, paper-shelled, on the pressure of light inside the orbit of Mercury, each colony like one vast resentful brain. There were 6 of these worms. They gyrated in peculiar patterns, at one time joining their bodies to form a gigantic hoop around the ship. Different radiation patterns were made evident upon the ship's dials, and it was obvious that these vermiform beings were trying to communicate. Neither Hogue nor his 2 interpreters could make anything of the radiation patterns, and one of the interpreters, after trying hard, sat blindly in a corner and shivered. Inferiority complex. Or that for a beginning, while alien minds strove impatiently to penetrate the naked and shivering Earth minds. This was space, and worse, It was space in the old times, before warp-vibrant communication, before rattled Earthmen could scream to a home base for moral support. The crew was still out there at the tubes when those worms came along, and before they could crawl or jet their way to the airlock, one of the worms plucked up a crew member. It was able-bodied spaceman Kroner, as capable and steady and fearless a man who ever had boarded the Lone Star. Kroner was seen at first to go rigid while the worm held him with two tentacles and looked him over with that submerged, swimming eye. Suddenly Kroner blasted his oxygen alcohol shoulder jets. The worm let him go and recoiled. Kroner slammed away into space, into nothingness. Suddenly, almost at the half-limit of his short supply of fuel, he turned on his own axis. He was expert, this Kroner, and had flipped his jet control so perfectly that he had turned 180 degrees, and for a couple of seconds he kept going directly backward on momentum against the jet's renewed forward blast. While that happened, he jerked his arms and legs in a wild running motion, running as though forward while still going backward. It was a comic thing to see. But at the instant of equilibrium between forward motion and backward motion, those in the Lone Star's control compartment caught Kroner's face at a high magnification upon the screen. "He'd been frightened mad," Hogue said. "We didn't need any doctor to tell us. We saw his face, and what he was shrieking all that time was, 'Ma, Ma, Ma, Ma.'" He came at Lone Star like a meteor, his arms outstretched as though running to the safety of maternal arms, and he hit the spaceship so hard that he started a seam in her outer skin. Whether he was killed by the impact or by the rupture of his suit was a rhetorical question. The man's body exploded outward in frozen streamers through the rents in the suit. The space worm plucked him up, examined him, casually tore the broken suit and the corpse into pieces. And, in the control compartment, the second officer began to scream and to hide, forcing his way into an impossible recess behind a switchboard. Inferiority complex. That, the helpless psychologist always said, was at the root of the madness when space travelers' primitive fears and emotions were lashed up by the whip of space. Lampell, long ago, seemed to have brought back a virus from some planet, an endemic disease that took control of all but the most hearty when confronted by new, terrible, intelligent life forms. "It was the cold knowingness of those worms," Hogue said reflectively. "It was the feeling that you were licked before you started. I felt the complex, and I had a terrible desire to escape my death. The only refuge for my mind from those merciless minds was in death. If I hadn't been a captain, with responsibility such an instinct within me, maybe I would have picked up a gun. But I didn't." He forced himself to try to communicate. There was radio and radar and the first model of the beam. They ignored them all. And finally, with an effort of will against the fear which literally sickened him, he put on a suit and went out upon the shell of Lone Star with a paint spray. The worms watched while he painted for them an ancient universal mathematical proposition. The sum of the squares of the sides equals the square of the hypotenuse. They looked with their horrible eyes, and finally, all together, they turned away in unmistakable disgust. They began to build a little solar system. Of nothingness they fashioned the black spheres, flipped them into shape with complicated motions of their tentacles. 9 they made, and set them in space with an approximation of the distances between the planetary orbits. It was the same kind of approximation which is necessary in any model of the solar system, for no model in which the planets are a recognizable size can cope, in scale, with interorbital distances. Finally, the worms grouped themselves in the center of all, merging their body glow into a fair replica of the sun. And all the eyes watched the spaceship while they waited for the stupid little beings within to understand. Couldn't reach our poor minds with their vibrations, so they gave us something solid to look at. What did it mean? That they were the architects of the solar system? Some of my crew were screaming we had met God. All I knew was that we had to get out of there while a few of us were sane. Finally, I drove a work gang outside to the tubes again, leading them myself, and we got to work on the liners, trying not to look at the worms and the solar system, but feeling their eyes and feeling their awful overpowering intelligence right through our suits. A buzzer cut in, not upon the tight beam, but upon the series communicator. "Excuse me, Captain Hogue," the ambassador said acidly. "There is word from Venus. It seems I have business to attend to." The old man, back on Earth, paused, and the president said, "We'll stay on beam, Phil, till you go." "Say, wait a minute," Hogue said anxiously. "I didn't get to the point of the story." But the ambassador had walked out of the room. He met the Ceres's captain hurrying toward him, white-faced. Infected by the man's haste and half-hysterical injunction to waste no time, he almost ran to the special communications compartment. Here, in a screen whose outside viewer pointed downward, he saw the smooth, liquid-seeming blanket of Venusian grey clouds, weirdly touched with iridescence by a blinding sun. The clouds, believed to be over 100 miles thick, blanketed the entire planet. They might contain water and oxygen somewhere below. Here, where they touched space, there were metallic vapor charged so heavily that no beam could ever penetrate them. The Martians, who awesomely never lied, had told Earthmen that Venusians existed, told them contemptuously. It would not be wise to attempt a landing upon Venus without permission, the Martians had said. Not wise for Earthmen, at any rate. Because of the peculiar vapor, there never had been electronic or warp communications with Venus. So far, the only message from below those clouds had come a month before to one of the patiently waiting, patiently capsule-dropping ships. The permission to land one unarmed ambassador. The ambassador saw now that communication this time had been by the same means. A rocket had come up through the clouds, trailing a wire, and had been caught in the great cable net extended behind the spaceship. "I had the wire plugged in immediately," the sweating captain said. "Expected to tell them to wait a minute, and had put the ambassador on. But they're not listening to us, just telling us. And there's a time limit. I would have had a line run to your suite if I'd known there was a time limit, but I should have known there'd be a time limit. I should have known how they act, all these races, because we're so feeble and stupid compared—" The man almost was gibbering. The ambassador slapped his shoulder heavily and stopped him. The ambassador wanted a slap himself, and his hand missed the first time as he reached for the loudspeaker stud. The voice came instantly, so mechanical and uninflected that it occurred to him that a machine had spoken into a recording machine. The Venusians must be so unearthly as to be unable to manage Earth sounds, if they made sounds at all. "Authority will advise him on the question of trade with Earth. He will be freed 1 hour thereafter. Your ship must remain in the same position meanwhile. The ambassador from Earth will leave your ship in precisely 18 minutes, proceeding directly downward. He will be picked up by our ship within the clouds. In this ship, a representative of Fifth Authority will advise him on the question of trade with Earth. He will be freed 1 hour thereafter. Your ship must remain in the same position meanwhile. The ambassador from Earth will leave your ship in precisely 18 minutes, proceeding directly—" The ambassador snapped the stud. His teeth gritted hard against a trembling. He was not even to land upon the alien planet then.
not even to talk to the head of government, but with a representative of fifth authority. It was so condescending, so contemptuous, and so deserved, of course, he thought, staring at the captain, who stared, wild-eyed. You wanted to run. You wanted to hide. Already you felt them inside your mind, ruthlessly peering, destroying. As crazy as an ambassador. Contemptuous time limit of 18 minutes. They'd been told that it took a minimum of 16 minutes to get into a spacesuit. "My suit! The dressers!" shouted the ambassador, remembering the 10-year men who waited to reassure him, and badly needing one last contact. "Bring everything to the Earth screen!" As he fled the room, he saw, in the screen which showed Venus, a vast silvery ovoid lift momentarily to the surface of the vapour, then sink slightly, and remain in a suggestion of menace neither in sight nor out of sight, waiting to engulf him. When he faced the Earth screen, 2 expert dressers flung themselves upon him with the pneumatic pads whose donning before the spacesuit took care and time. In centre room, all the perfectly sane, shielded men attempted to convey by smiles their confidence in the shuddering creature being lapped in weirdness. The ambassador strove with all his considerable mental power to hold the impression of those reassuring smiles. And that doddering fool, Hogue, with his one arm waving unwanted friendliness, said, "Ahoy, ambassador! Now we can get to the point of that story." A story about superior, merciless beings, calculated to break the last weak thread of a man's confidence. "Shut up!" the ambassador wanted to scream across space, and would have, had not the dressers jammed his mouth closed at that moment as they adjusted a throat pad. On Earth, too, they tried to shut up Hogue, but they couldn't. "I'm not the old fool you think I am," he said. "Listen, ambassador, gentlemen, high privilege, ambassador," he said urgently. "I told you I've been saving this story to tell an ambassador at the last minute when he's in the spot you're in. I've been waiting 50 years. Listen. The vermiforms made this little solar system, and we didn't understand, couldn't understand. We got our liners replaced finally, and no more than half of us were capable of standing a watch when we blasted off. Ambassador, we blasted the hell out of there. The vermiforms stayed where they were for a few seconds, then they began to follow. We were streaming a good train, of course, the old fission train, a couple of miles of very fancy destruction and waste. So the worms came along. They overtook us easy, and they began to dance in and out of our train. Yes, sir, ambassador, they weaved and they circled in and out of that awful atom blast. And I knew that the atom blast will kill anything, chop through any armor. But not those worms. Now they showed us how superior they were. Now they made fun of our power. And I wanted to run and hide when my officer was hiding down among the mattresses we rigged for him among the girders along the keel. My mind was scarred by space and by everything that Earthmen were not born to. And then it happened. Adjustments now had been made, and the ambassador could speak while the dressers almost threw him into the inner suit. His hand clawed his face, and he said hoarsely, "For God's sake, man, spare me!" "And then it happened!" old Hogue shouted, thrusting away from those in centre room who were now trying physically to shut him up. "The worms died! They died in the atom blast!" The ambassador stared, and around the ivory table they stared at the last of the pioneers. "Died! The vermiform's natural armor was proof against all the rays of space, and it held out against the atom blast for a quarter of a minute. But then it went. One after the other they went limp, and the blast spewed them backward, and we could see the spreading holes in them. and then they were out of sight, dead, killed, because they hadn't known any better, by George. And we went on to Phoebe, and got along better than anyone else with the things that sit inside their crystals, thinking. Got the platinum nobody else could take, because we knew that the universe can breed morons, incompetence. The crystal people are smarter than Earthmen, sure, but at least we knew we were smarter than somebody else. Don't you see, Ambassador, the old man said earnestly, that only the inferiority complex kept us from knowing right away that those worms were no better than children? They hadn't been trying to send us any message with radiations. No, it had been only the natural radiations of their bodies, changing as they changed their formations around us, as they played. One of them picked up poor Krona. Why not? The thing was curious. Took him apart, later, the way a child will take apart a toy. My business with a square on the hypotenuse? Hell, how could they understand when they'd never learned any mathematics? How could they? The ambassador echoed, and he was smiling. And that little trick of theirs? Making a solar system. Well, don't you see that they had to show off? One of their natural functions is simply gathering and stacking together the scattered atoms of space. I'll bet they can't make anything but black balls of amorphous matter. It's possible they build themselves a little world here and there to lay their eggs on or something. So there they were, feeling kind of abashed because they had no spaceship or anything. So they just had to show us what they could do, and that they actually had gone and counted the planets of this system. On their tentacles, I'll bet, since they had more than 9 tentacles. And wasn't it childish, getting together in the middle to show us a nice glowing sun? They were locking the thorax section on the ambassador. He stood straight and silent, very straight. "Ambassador," the old man pleaded over 30 million miles, "you don't know what you're going to meet on Venus. You don't know that they're particularly smart, and they don't know about you. Maybe they're a little afraid of you. Maybe they're a lot afraid of you. We don't know one way, but we don't know the other. But you know now, the best way and the best minute, I can tell you, that some pretty dumb creatures live beyond Earth. Now, the way my grandfather's grandfather used to say, you wouldn't start selling your horse to a stranger by telling him that your horse is no good." Silence, then, on the beam from Earth to Venus. The dressers began to lower the helmet over the ambassador's head. He stopped them. "Wait a minute." Still that nakedness in his mind, and the fear ready to pounce again. But that was only an effect of space, not Venusian's. Or was it simply Lampell's heritage? A conditioning? And that contemptuous message, with its almost impossible time limit, and its pointed refusal to allow him to set foot upon Venus, and its representative of the fifth authority. He didn't know one way, and he didn't know the other. But it could be a defense mechanism on the Venusian's part. In center room, an old man had slumped in his chair, exhausted, reduced to crippled flesh that bore one bright, brave Earthman's eye. The ambassador waved. The old-timer waved back eagerly. "Gentlemen," said the ambassador formally, but he spoke to the one adventurer. "I thought I was in a hurry, but I've decided I've plenty of time. I think it will be a very good idea to open these negotiations by keeping the other party waiting."
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. The Beasts in the Void by Paul W. Fairman. Originally published in Imagination, April 1956. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The examiner looked doubtful and said, "But, Mr. Holloway, regulations require that I read your log before I take verbal testimony." Holloway's face was drawn and ravaged. His bloodshot eyes sat in black pits. They were trained on the examiner, but looked through him rather than at him. Holloway said, "But I must talk. I've got to tell you about it. I have to keep talking." "But—" Holloway's words tumbled out. "It started in the control cabin there in deep space. When Mrs. Kelvey came in, she was the blonde one. I turned around and she said, 'Captain, there's a great big tiger in the companionway.'" The desperate Holloway, fearful of being stopped or running out of words, went into minute detail. "She made the statement as a pouting complaint, almost casually. Then, before I could speak, she realized what she'd said, and her face changed. A kind of horrified double take. 'A tiger? In the companionway of a spaceship?' This last was an incredulous question she asked herself. Then she fainted. I looked outside. I thought I saw something blurred and indistinct, but it vanished quickly, if it was really there at all. The companionway was empty. No tiger. No animal of any kind." The examiner, holding up a hand of protest, looked like a man directing traffic. "Please, Mr. Holloway, please. We must remember regulations." Holloway's eyes closed for a moment, but he resolutely forced them open as though afraid of something. The scene was Holloway's two-room suite in the Spaceport Hotel. There were 3 men present: Holloway, skipper of the Space King; John Mason, port resident; and Merle Kennedy, section examiner for the Space Authority people. Kennedy regarded Holloway with frank concern. Good heavens, the man was a complete mess, looked ready to collapse. Kennedy turned to Mason. "This can be postponed, you know." Mason was regarding Holloway also. Strange, he thought. Holloway had left in a fanfare of publicity. Now it appeared his return would be even more dramatic. Maybe Holloway was that kind of a chap. The kind things just happened to. He was quite young, though he certainly didn't look it now. He'd been known as a playboy ever since his father struck it big in Venusian oil. But good-looking, personable, he had worn the label well. He'd been good copy because the public regarded him with patronizing affection. To them, he'd been a nice kid having fun, not a young wastrel wasting his father's money. Naturally, he would pick a glamour girl to play the romantic feminine role, and Melody Hayden had filled the bill perfectly. Together they had enchanted the public. Princess and Prince Charming stuff. Then tragedy. Disaster in a rocketing sports car. Melody's coffin sealed before the funeral. Young Holloway coming off without a scratch. Melody's death was a bombshell, and everyone asked, "What will he do now?" expecting, of course, something sensational. He didn't let them down. Dramatically, he announced a completely new life. He bought a spaceship and forswore his old ways. He had quite a reputation as a big game hunter. He'd stalked the vicious Plutonian ice bears and lain in Venusian swamps waiting for the 10-ton lizards to rise out of the slime. He had knocked over the wiliest of animals, a telepathic Uranian mountain wolf, and had dropped in flight a Martian radar bat, a feat duplicated by only 3 other marksmen of record. So what more natural occupation than guiding hunting parties in deep space? Holloway had been obviously torn by Melody's tragic death. Perhaps out among the stars he could forget. There had been some trouble, Mason recalled, in clearing Holloway's first cruise. A party of 5. Not to any established hunting ground, but a DU thing. Destination unknown. And they were always trouble. Clearance had been made, though, and now here was Holloway back again, dramatically, of course, with one of his party dead and the other 4 in trance-like stupors. Strange. And stranger still, Holloway's reason for wanting to talk immediately, with no rest, no medical attention. "It will help keep me awake. I mustn't go to sleep. Can't I make you understand? I've got to stay awake." Mason pitied the man. He turned to Kennedy. "I have the log here, sir. Perhaps you could go over it now." Holloway leaned forward. "I'll tell you what's in the log. Every word of it, if I just sit here waiting." Mason laid a hand on his knee. "It's all right, old chap. I won't let you go to sleep. You and I will talk while Mr. Kennedy goes through the log. It won't take long." Mason handed the book to Kennedy. He was almost apologetic. "It's a strange log, sir. It—" "Strange?" Kennedy frowned. Logs had no right to be strange. There were regulations, rules stating exactly how a log should be kept. "Well, sir, the lad is young. His first trip. I just meant there's perhaps a little more in the log than should appear there." "We'll see," Kennedy said. There was a slight frost on his words. If disciplinary measures were in the offing, it would pay not to get too cozy with Holloway and the resident. Kennedy opened the log. The first entry was dated June 3rd, 4:10 p.m. Earth time. Kennedy frowned. Permissible, of course, but sloppy, very sloppy. The better skippers computed from Orion immediately after blastoff. Kennedy sat back and began to read. June 3rd, 4:10 p.m. We blasted at 2:18 p.m. A good getaway. Course 58.329 by the polar angle. No blast sickness among the passengers. They are old hands. I put the automatic board into control at 3:50 p.m. I checked the tubes. Pressures balanced and equal. I don't like this cruise. I don't like Murdo. He's a domineering slob. The other 4, well, Keebler is an alcoholic. Kelvy an empty-headed opportunist. I don't particularly dislike them. They're just a worthless pair who would rather fawn on Murdo and take his insults than work for a living. The 2 wives are both young. Martha Keebler has a child's mind in a woman's body. Jane Kelvy is an oversexed witch with an indecent exposure complex. I may have trouble with her. Already she's parading around in skimpy shorts and a bra. Evidently Murdo doesn't care for women. He pays no attention to her. Money and power are his dish, and a terrible restlessness. Melody, baby, I wish you were here. June 4th, 3 p.m. I had a talk with Murdo about this silly cruise. Tried to swing him onto something that makes a little more sense. Pluto, Venus, Ganymede, some hunting ground I'm familiar with. No good. Even a suggestion, and he thinks you're crossing him and snorts like a bull. Still demands to go to this place where big game prowls in space. where elephants and leopards and snakes and anything you can name fly around your ship and look in your ports, where you do your hunting in spacesuits right out in the void. Why in hell did I fall for this idiocy? Guess I just didn't care. Maybe I thought it was a good idea because it sounded like a cruise you could get killed on without much trouble. No, I shouldn't say that. Melody wouldn't like me to say it. She was so wonderful, so level-headed. How wrong they all were about us, about her. Because she was so beautiful, I guess. I tried to tell them I'd married an angel, and they took bets among themselves on how long it would last. The answer to that would have been forever. It still is. I've lost so much and learned so much in such a very short time. The hell with Murdo and his 4 puppets. I'll take them out and bring them back. Then I'll go somewhere alone, and I won't come back at all. Melody. Course 28.493 by the polar angle. Went through small asteroid field. Kennedy looked up sharply. He frowned. "This log is unacceptable." Holloway was pacing the floor, his eyes blank and terrible. "Unacceptable?" "Course and position should be noted within each 24-hour period. You missed June 5th entirely. You—" Kennedy leafed through the pages. "Why, at times you missed 3 and 4 days in sequence." "Sometimes I didn't have time to write." Mason tried to hide his disgust. How did men like Kennedy get into positions they weren't fitted for? The ass! Couldn't he see this man was suffering? Mason said, "Why not reserve comment until you're finished, Mr. Kennedy?" Kennedy's eyes widened at the sharp tone of Mason's voice. "Really? When residents start dictating to examiners?" Kennedy saw the stiffness in Mason's face, and something more. He went quickly back to his reading. June 6, 1 p.m. I talked some more with Murdo about this fool cruise. He got wind of our destination, wherever it is, from some rich idiot in Paris, and I don't use idiot figuratively. His informant was in some kind of a private nut house, an exclusive insane asylum of idiots with lots of money, and he had lucid intervals. At one of these times he told Murdo where he'd been and what had happened. I don't think Murdo believes all of it, but he wants to see for himself. Well, if he wants to spend his money chasing meteorites, it's his business. Keebler got drunk as a goat, strapped him in his bunk and left him there. Murdo spent a few hours explaining guns to Mrs. Keebler. I think he enjoys the look of wonder on her face. Makes him feel very superior knowledge-wise. Her face is just built that way, and so far as she's concerned, he could be talking Greek. He thinks she's very beautiful. I wonder if he ever saw Melody's picture. Course 36.829 by the Orion angle. All clear. June 9th, 1 a.m. Course 36.841 by the Orion angle. Small asteroids. Jane Kelvey is bored and has started taking it out on me. When I passed her door, it was open. She was taking a sponge bath, stark naked in the middle of the cabin. She turned around to face me and did a very bad job of acting flustered, trying to cover herself up with a small sponge. How crude can a female get? She was hoping I'd come in. If I had, it would have been to slap her face. I got away as fast as I could. June 10th, 7 p.m. Course 41.864 by the Orion angle. Brushed a small asteroid.
I've been noting the time wrong. It should be figured on a 24-hour cycle. Midnight to midnight. The hell with it. Had a fight with Murdo. He wanted to take over the ship. His words were, "Let's get some speed out of this slop bucket." I reminded him I was captain. He reminded me he was footing the bills. I asked him how he would like to be locked in his cabin for the remainder of the cruise. He didn't say, but I guess he wouldn't have liked it because he quieted down. Keebler has been quietly drunk for the last 2 days. Lucky Keebler. June 13th, 18 hours. Course 26.932 by the Virgo angle. Went 4 degrees off course to avoid small planetoid. Jane Kelvey came to my cabin an hour ago. The rest were asleep. She wore a blue dressing gown with nothing under it. I want to set down what happened in case there's ever a kickback, although I don't think there ever will be. I was sitting in a chair, and she came up behind me, and it was very unfortunate because I saw the blue dressing gown first. By sheer chance, it was almost exactly like the one Melody wore that first night. I was thinking of Melody. Melody was all around me and inside me, in my mind, in my heart, in all my aching regrets. So when that dressing gown brushed me, something electric happened inside, and I got up and took Jane Kelvey in my arms. It wasn't more than 3 or 4 seconds, but in that time the gown had been brushed aside. Then I came to my senses and pushed her away. The dressing gown stayed parted. She stepped back, confused. She said, "What's the matter? Are you scared?" "I'm disgusted. Button your gown. Get out of here." "What are you? Not one of those noble creatures, I hope, who wouldn't touch a man's wife?" "I said get out. I wouldn't touch you regardless." "But you just did." "It was a mistake. Look, I'm a woman. You're a man, I think. We're alone in space and life is short. Let's have fun and then forget about it." I slapped her across the mouth. A skipper can be jailed for life for striking a passenger, even with cause. But I slapped her, and I'm setting it down in the log. Kennedy looked up from his reading. "Jane Kelvey, she is the dead one?" Mason nodded. Kennedy looked at Holloway with marked severity. "Are you sure you only slapped her?" Mason exploded. "Good God, man, did you see the body? You're not implying he did that to her, are you?" "I'm not implying anything," Kennedy said within a restrained grimness that infuriated Mason. "Why don't you finish the log before you start passing judgment?" Kennedy leafed through the pages. Wait a minute. This log doesn't cover the whole cruise. It breaks off in the middle of a sentence." "Read what's there, man. Read what's there." Very serious, Kennedy muttered. "Not completing a log. No license should have been issued this man. Lax, very lax." He sat back to make himself more comfortable and prepared to go on with his reading. June 30th, 3 hours. Course 29.341 by the Virgo angle. I think that's the course. The instruments are acting funny. In fact, a lot of things seem to be wrong. Some of the constellations aren't in the right places anymore. I began noticing these things a couple of days ago and spoke to Murdo. I suggested we turn back. I told him it was my duty as a skipper to look out for the welfare of my passengers, and that included not continuing if vital instruments showed signs of failure. He sneered at me and said, "I thought you were a big game hunter, Holloway." I told him I'd hunted big game, yes. "It doesn't sound like it. You sound like a timid old woman. So you've made some miscalculations. The course is still right. It's on the flight pattern in the automatic control board, and I know it's correct, because I gave it to you. But if instruments fail, nothing stays right. Okay, you're the skipper. If you've turned yellow and want to show your tail, I guess there's nothing I can do about it. He almost got his jaw broken, but I was able to hold myself. Then, suddenly, I didn't care. I didn't care whether Murdo stayed alive or got killed. As to the others, they'd come on the cruise with their eyes open. They deserved whatever they got, and I certainly didn't give a damn about myself. Guess I wasn't cut out to skipper a ship. A skipper should care. That's all he should do. Just care. I'd rather dream about melody. I don't know what the date is. The chronometer's stopped, so I don't even know what time it is. But what does it matter about the time if you don't even know what day it is? We just go on and on. Murdo, I can't figure out. Windbag or not, braggart or not. He has an iron will. I think he's scared, but he won't admit it, and some stubborn streak inside him won't let him turn tail and run. He hides his fear behind long accounts of his hunting trips. He describes the vicious animals he's killed. He bores us with accounts of his skill as a great hunter. The rest listen because they have to. I go to my cabin and remember melody. The rest are scared too, but they're too scared of Murdo to let him know it. That's an odd one. Scared for your life, but afraid to tell the big man because he might kill you. Would Murdo kill in a fit of rage? I don't know. Keebler stays drunk, so none of it bothers him. Keebler's wife, I think, is in love with Murdo, but it's a kind of little girl love. She never quite grew up. Kelvy glues himself to Murdo and sticks like a plaster. He seems to consider Murdo a haven, as though Murdo's bulk will make everything all right. Jane Kelvy hasn't quit making passes at me, but they're half-hearted. She bothers me. I'm uneasy when she is around. I get the feeling that any minute she might drop to her knees and beg. What you do with a woman on her knees before you, begging? Maybe before long her husband will look good to her. Maybe she'll be able to get him away from Murdo's side for a while. I look at both these women and realized what I lost. Melody. Jane Kelvy came to my cabin. It's hit her that things aren't right. She's scared. She asked, "Why did you tell Murdo you wanted to turn back?" "Because I thought we'd come too far." "Do you still think so?" "Everything will be all right." "The instruments, are they working again?" I lied to her. "They're working." "Do you think it's really as Murdo says, that there are animals out in space?" "I don't know." She looked wan and forlorn, and I was sorry for her. She said, "I've only been on one hunting trip in my life." "Is that so?" "In India. A boy carried my gun for me. When the tiger came, the boy handed me the gun and told me where to point. I fired, but I didn't hit the tiger. Somebody else shot it." "That was too bad." "No, it was all right. He was such a big, beautiful animal, so sleek and powerful." I saw her body tremble as she closed her eyes. I said, "You better get some rest." She passed a hand over her eyes, then gave me an odd, wistful smile. "Animals are smarter, I think. We do make awful messes out of our lives, don't we?" "I'm afraid we do."
But is it our fault? God makes us this way. We can't help that.
No, I guess we can't.
Why did God make us like we are?
I don't know, Jane. Let's hope He does.
Isn't that sacrilege or something, doubting Him?
I guess it is. She reached out suddenly and touched my face.
You're a nice guy. I don't blame you for slapping me.
I'm sorry. You're pretty nice yourself. The smile faded.
I'm not,
she said miserably, and left the cabin.
Poor kid.
I forgot her and thought of Melody. Something's gone wrong with everything. Not a very scientific statement for a skipper to make, but that's how it is. The stars have disappeared. The instruments jumped around as though they had minds of their own. The dial needles spin around like crazy. And something else, something even worse. Space has changed. I mean, there's something out there in space. First, I just felt it, a raw uneasiness. Then I trained a light through the port, and I could see it. Stuff that looks like dust but isn't. It's hazy, and yet it sparkles, and you have a sense of being on a ship that's pushing its way through a fog so thick the friction holds you back. And there's something more about this sparkling fog. You look out at it, and it seems to be looking back at you. Or maybe I'm losing my mind. Anyhow, that's the way it seems, as though it's waiting for you to speak to it. Say hello or something. I guess I'm going crazy. The sparkling fog is affecting the others too. They've all quieted down, and they slip along the bulkheads as though they were being followed. Only Murdo blusters back. He says, "What the hell? We expected something different, didn't we? Well, this is sure different enough, isn't it?" I'd turn back, but I don't know how. I have nothing to go by. The instruments make no sense. I am going crazy. I looked out the port just now and saw a water buffalo. It was standing right out there in space with its head down looking at the ship. I had a light turned on it, and suddenly it charged and hit the port head on. It bounced off and went staggering away and disappeared. But it left a big white scratch on the quartz outside. At least I think it did. Wait, I'll look again. Yes, a big white scratch. It's still there. So how can I be mad? Maybe it's a new kind of madness. Some of the sparkling fog has penetrated the ship. Turn out the light and you can see it in the cabin. Not as thick as out in the void, but thick enough to see, thick enough to stand there and ask you to talk to it. Murdo is ready to turn back. He came to the control room and said, "I saw it out there." "You saw what?" His face was pale and his hands twitched. "A boa constrictor, exactly like the one I killed 4 years ago on the Amazon. It came to the port and looked in at me." "It must be your imagination." "No, it was there. Let's turn back. Get out of this." "I wish we could." "You mean?" "I don't know where back is. We might just as well go as we are. Changing course doesn't help if you don't know your directions. Our only hope is to drive on out of this cloud. If I turned, I might go right back into it." "Then one direction is as good as another." "That's right." His mind wandered as he turned away. "I didn't know it would be like this," he muttered. "I thought it would be fun, sport. I thought we'd put on spacesuits and go out and make a kill. I thought—" "The spacesuits are ready. Do you want to try it?" He shuddered. his hanging jowls almost flapping. "You couldn't drag me out there." The stuff is getting thicker in the ship. Jane came into my cabin. She had an odd look on her face. She said, "There's a big tiger in the companionway." I got up from my bunk, and suddenly she seemed to realize what she'd said. She repeated it. Then she fell down in a faint. I put her in my bunk and looked out into the companionway. The sparkling fog glittered, but there was no tiger. When she came to, she didn't seem to know where she was. Then she smiled. "I must have been drinking too much," she said. Then she realized where she was. "But look where it got me. Into your bunk. Do you feel all right now?" "I guess so. I can get up now. I do have to get up, don't I?" "I think you'd better." After she left, I did some thinking. The sparkling haze had been outside the ship, and I'd seen a water buffalo through the port. Murdo had seen a boa constrictor. Then the haze penetrated the hull and got inside the ship. And Jane had seen a tiger in the companionway. Were they phantoms? Was Jane's tiger a tiger of the mind? Murdo swore his snake had been real, and my buffalo left a mark on the port. I sat there trying to think, with the sparkling fog drifting around me. It seemed to be trying to tell me something. Things grow worse. Today, at mess, Murdo was holding forth about a Plutonian ice bear he'd killed. I think he was trying to cover the gloom that has settled over us. Anyhow, he just got to the point where the bear was charging down on him, where we heard the roar of thunder from outside. Maybe I'd better repeat that for the record. We heard a roaring through the walls of the spaceship, in the void. Nothing goes through the walls of a spaceship in the void, but we all heard it and jumped to the port. And we all saw it. An ice bear as big as 10 of the largest that ever lived in the Plutonian ice floes. A huge, ravening beast that rushed through the void at the ship and tried to tear the port out of its metal seat with teeth as big as the height of a man. The women fell back, screaming. Keebler, in his usual stupor, stared blankly, as though not realizing what was going on. Kelvy looked to Murdo for guidance. When none came, he crouched behind a chair. Murdo fell back slowly, step by step, as though his eyes were fastened to the quartz, and it was hard to pull away. I don't remember what I did. Murdo was saying, "My God! My God! My God!" as though chanting a ritual. He tore his eyes from the sight and looked at me. "You wanted big game, Buster," I croaked. "There it is." "But it can't be real. It can't." "Maybe not, but if that port gives, I bet it won't be from vacuum pressure." "Vacuum draws, it doesn't press," Kelvy babbled inanely, but nobody paid any attention to him. The beast made 2 more charges on the ship, then drew back screaming in rage from a snapped tooth. And all around us, there in the ship, the sparkling fog glittered and tried to talk. 2 hours. The beast still rages in the void outside our ship. Jane is dead. She was horribly mangled. I put her in her bunk and laid a blanket over her, and now the blanket is soaked in her blood. No one could have helped her. It happened in the lounge. She was in there alone. I was in the control room. I don't know where the rest were. I was working uselessly with the controls when I heard a terrible scream mixed with a hideous snarling. I ran into the companionway and stared toward the lounge. Murdo appeared from somewhere, and we were shouldering each other on the companion ladder. Murdo fell heavily. Then we were both looking into the lounge. It was too late to help Jane. We saw her there, still and bloody. A shiny black leopard was crouching gory-mouthed over her body with its paws on her breast. Its eyes were black magnets holding mine. I said, "Get a gun," trying to speak without moving my lips. "But, damn you, get a gun!" Murdo staggered away. It seemed a year before he came back with a Hinsey Special 442 caliber. The leopard was tight, ready to spring. I didn't dare move a muscle. I said, "Over my shoulder, get him, don't miss." That last was a little silly. How could a man miss with a Hinsey at 10 feet? Murdo fired and tore the leopard's head off. It was down already, so it didn't move. It sat there, headless, its tail twitching slightly. Then it was still. I didn't hesitate this time. I said, "Come on, we've got to get this out of here before the others show." We put the dead leopard into the forward storage bunker. Then I picked up poor Jane and carried her to her room. Murdo helped me up the ladder. The others were in the companionway, and they pressed back in horror to let me pass. For the first time since we started, Keebler was sober. Ashen, shaking, stone sober. He broke. Screamed and ran for his bottle, the world of reality too terrible for him to bear. There was no huddle, no conference, no meeting of the minds. Everyone else went to the galley and sat staring into space, stared at the dancing little sparkles in the air. I went to my cabin. When confronted by a reality, no matter how crazy and improbable, a man must not turn from it. He cannot carry the mangled body of a woman in his arms and then say to himself, "This isn't real because it doesn't make sense." It does make sense, some kind of sense, or it would not exist. A man must say rather, "I don't understand this, and maybe I never will, but God gave me a brain and I must try. I can't sit back and deny reality. I must try to understand it." I cleared my mind and tried to rationalize the things around us. Out in the darkness, there was a terrible roaring and yammering, the thuds and bellows of violence. I went to the port. There, in the light from the ship, the ice bear and the water buffalo were fighting. It was a terrible and magnificent thing, but to me it was an anticlimax, a sideshow of almost casual interest. The ice bear outsized the water buffalo by too much to be in any danger, but the buff fought savagely, and the ice bear had no easy time. The buff opened a long deep gash in the bear's throat when the bear missed a lunge, and the Plutonian mammal fell back with a roar of pain and fury. They came together again, and this time the bear got the buff in a hug, and it was all over. The buff's spine broke, and the bear bent the body double, then tore it to pieces. I wondered if the others were watching. I went back to pacing, back to my thinking. I have been thinking, racking my brain, and of one thing I am sure. Some invisible intelligence is trying to help me, trying to give me knowledge. The sparkling fog. A great and wonderful thing has happened. And I know. Do you realize what that means? To know in a situation like this, and to be wonderfully and wildly happy? The knowledge was not all given me. There was a thought process of my own developing. The thing given me was the basic knowledge upon which to build, and proof of this knowledge, absolute and indisputable proof. The sparkling fog is mind stuff. I will not defend that statement. I will not rationalize it, but I will seek explanations, consider possibilities. Known. This sparkling fog through which we drift is intelligent matter, the stuff of thoughts, the basic material from which consciousness springs. It is consciousness itself. Supposed. It is probably electronuclear in composition, and appears to be completely innocent. By that I mean it has no intention to harm, perhaps because it does not understand the difference between good and evil, harm and help, pain and pleasure. It has only one urge, the basic urge of all creation, to evolve, to develop, as the tree has but one basic urge, to grow and greaten, the flower but one desire, to bloom, to improve, to assert itself through evolution and become better. Perhaps, and who can successfully deny it, this great space cloud could be a storage place of the Creator himself, a storage place for mind stuff. When an infant or an animal or a plant is touched with the magic thing called life, where does that magic come from? Is it created at the very moment, or does it come somehow from a source pile? Is this cloud a source pile of life itself? No one can say, but I think I've hit on a limitation of this mind stuff. I'm going to try an experiment, and pray to God it works. I'm going to find Murdo and knock him unconscious. I have solved the mind stuff. What just happened is the last bit of proof I need. I went to the galley. Murdo had wandered away. I found him in the lounge. I stepped casually in front of him, set myself, and drove a straight right to his jaw. He went down like a log. I closed my eyes and counted to 20, praying to God to make me right in my belief, in the crazy theory I evolved. I opened my eyes and turned to the storage locker. I looked inside. The dead leopard was gone. I went to the port and looked out. The huge ice bear had been ravening insanely among the shreds of the water buffalo's body. As I watched, both bear and buff began fading. Before my eyes they disappeared, evolved back into the stuff of the sparkling fog. I had proved my theory. Now all the parts dropped into place. The mind stuff has only the ability and the urge to evolve, nothing else. No imagination. It can evolve only if given something to reproduce. This it can get only from a human mind. It is able to see an image pictured in the human memory and reproduce it in a state of absolute reality. Witness. Jane saw a tiger in the companionway. Clear in her memory was the image of the tiger she had shot at in India. The mind stuff saw it and reproduced it in reality. The water buffalo came from my own mind. I killed one exactly like it a year ago. The ice bear was out of Murdo's memory, as was the black leopard and the snake. Witness. The 3 animals created inside the ship did not appear until the mind stuff from outside penetrated the hull and entered the ship. They were of normal size, but the animals created outside the ship were far out of proportion, the ice bear especially. Why? Because, I believe, the mind stuff is denser in the void. There it has more strength. My defense against the mind stuff was formulated almost accidentally. I remembered the sequence of Jane's tiger. She saw it, entered my cabin, realized its significance, and fainted. I looked into the companionway and saw the tiger fading. So I knocked out Murdo for final proof and got it. As soon as he lapsed into unconsciousness, the recreations from his mind turned back into sparkling fog. Obviously, and a heaven-sent phenomenon it is, the mind stuff immediately loses its subject image when the mind from which it came goes unconscious. The mind stuff has no memory of its own and cannot hold its recreated image in the evolved form under conditions of unconsciousness. The answer now becomes simple. I drugged Murdo before he regained consciousness. I drugged the other 3 by means of whiskey and food. They have been unconscious for 12 hours. Nothing has happened. I shall keep them that way. The mind stuff is trying to complain to me, almost petulantly, as a child. I sense it sharply. It does not understand the wrong it has done, and feels it has been deprived of its right. I have no time for the mind stuff. I guard myself against it and ignore it. There are other things on my mind. Shall I go back if we ever escape from the sparkling fog? I don't know. I don't want to go back. I want to go on and on forever, just like this. But the others cannot go on like this. It would be murder. I don't know. I don't know. I must keep awake. I use drugs. I must not sleep. Not sleep. We have cleared the fog. The instruments are working again. Again the stars glow. What shall I do? Melody. Kennedy looked up from his reading. As I said, and he spoke severely, you break off at an abrupt point. You did not complete the log. Holloway's red eyes were glazed. I had other things to do. I was tired of keeping a log. Mason sought to draw Kennedy off his quarry. There's an odd point, he said, looking at Holloway. Only animals were recreated. Do you think the mind stuff was capable only of recreating animals? Holloway spoke in an exhausted monotone. It took the clearest image from the strongest minds. Murdo thought mainly of hunting. He pondered on his more spectacular kills. Thus, the mind stuff used his images. I see. Holloway seemed to sag, to shrink. He said, The mind stuff could recreate anything. It brought melody back to me. Kennedy sprang to his feet. There is no reference in this log to... Mason turned on him. Shut up, you fool. He laid a gentle hand on Holloway's shoulders. Tell us about it, old chap. Holloway turned his burning eyes on the closed door to the next room. She's in there. I wanted to get rid of you. I was afraid you would take her away from me. But it's no use. I can't hold my consciousness much longer. Then she will vanish. Holloway tried weakly to rise from his chair. He called, Melody, Melody, baby. The door opened. A beautiful girl in a blue dressing gown came gracefully into the room. She walked straight to Holloway and took his tortured head into her soft hands. Her eyes pleaded with the men. He suffers so. He will not sleep. I can't make him sleep. I don't understand. Holloway's head dropped suddenly onto his chest. He slumped down in his chair, and as he did so, a change took place. The two men stood rooted, staring. As melody began to fade, slowly, into a transparent image, into a mist, into a handful of sparkling fog. Then she was gone. Mason knelt by the bone-thin body in the chair. He made a quick examination and got wearily to his feet. "Holloway is dead," he murmured. "Drugs of that nature would kill an elephant. I can't understand how he lived so long." Kennedy blinked and seemed to come out of a trance. He frowned. "And the investigation hardly started." Mason shook his head and looked pityingly at Kennedy. It was just no use with a man like him. Mason said, "There's one point entirely apparent without an investigation." "What's that?" Mason's voice was sharp and cold. "That our little playboy, for all his reputation of frivolity, was a better man than you and I put together. Does that register, Mr. Kennedy?" Kennedy flared. "Now see here, I'm only doing my job." "Oh, shut up," Mason said, and strode out of the room.
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. The Planet of Illusion by Donald A. Wollheim, writing as Millard V. Gordon, originally published in Comet, March 1941. Narrated by Tom Trussel. A phantom land and a phantom folk come sailing out of the deep unknown, with a soundless roar and a lightless flash, to conquer a void for them alone. Roger Dainteth. "Planet sighted," sang out Kendall, eye glued to the electro-telescope. "Where away?" rang Fred Broster from his place at the controls. 5 point on 10 left from star, 0.37 above the ecliptic, came Kendall's voice again from the forward observation window. "You're daft and dreaming. Snap into it and look again," Broster yelled, staring hard at the automatically recording space chart. "There's nothing here but a particularly empty species of nothingness." The captain's keen grey eyes stared carefully at the glowing panel before him. On it shone out tiny points of light which revealed each of the different bodies through whose vicinity the astrolight was passing. A remarkable device actuated by delicate gravital detectors which marked out every body they approached. And according to this chart, there was no such planet recorded in the depth of the device that which Kendall had sighted. "I'm not dreaming. Your chart is wrong if you can't find it there," Kendall remarked after a pause, still staring through the lens of the instrument. Broster examined the chart again. No, there positively was no planet circling the star as his observer claimed. "Come away from there," he called, straightening up. "Dr. Seward, will you please take the observer's place and check?" Seward dropped the calculations in hand, walked across the control room of the great interstellar explorer, up to the very tip. Kendall stood aside while the doctor applied his eye to the lens. "It's there all right, Broster. A little red disc exactly where he called it off. The chart's wrong." Broster ran a hand through his chestnut hair, a puzzled look in his eyes. He glared at the space chart for a moment, as if loath to believe that the faithful instrument could have gone haywire. Then he picked his way over to the electro-telescope to verify the sighting personally. A moment later, the three were looking at each other wonderingly. All realized what this might mean. If that space chart failed them, it might be all over with any possibility ever of returning home. Space navigating in the bounds of the solar system was one thing. There it didn't matter whether you ran by chart or by observation. But here in the bounds of cosmic space, thousands of light years from the sun, where they had to navigate in the blackness of interstellar distances, the space chart was all important. Bodies out here were dark. There were no stars nearby from which they could reflect light. "The chart will have to be overhauled," murmured the captain.
If it's gone wrong... What about this planet? It's the only one around this star, put in Kendall, jerking a thumb in its general direction. Head toward it. We may as well give it the once-over. The huge ship pursued its unvarying course through the approaching star. At a single light-year away, they decelerated, slowed down. Riding the strange echogravity waves, the little-known carrier waves for light and gravity which seemed to travel as fast in relation to light as light in relation to sound, this craft of the 30th century was able to accomplish what had for centuries been believed unachievable. They approached until at last the gravital drag clutched the ship, started to draw it in toward that vast fiery globe spurting forth countless tons of disintegrated matter per second, emanating energy inconceivable. Yet, withal, a small star, smaller than Sol, and quite inconspicuous as stars go. As they drifted, Broster and Seaward examined the space chart thoroughly, but in vain. Nothing could be found out of order, no short circuits, no tubes needing replacement. It was in perfect shape, but it refused to light a white speck in its black field for the near planet. They watched the planet grow larger, slowly made out surface details, a ruddy world, bathed entirely in red light, although the star around which it circled was white. Crimson clouds floated in masses of carmine seas and nesting land masses. The glow of the red world shone in through the stellar quartzite ports, throwing a weird, bloody glare on everything. "This is a hell of a world," growled Kendall. "You'd go nuts there after a while." Seaward nodded. "Quite so. Red is a colour that acts to irritate those who look at it overlong. I wouldn't advise staying on this world for more than a few minutes. We could easily go mad were we forced to remain here so much as a day." "We'll land anyway and look around. If—" Broster was cut off abruptly as the shrill scream of the alarm pierced his line of thought. "What the devil is that?" The sound of running feet from the far back of the ship came to their ears. Then the fourth member of the crew shrieked into the control room. "Spaceships approaching us!" Arundel shouted. "Didn't you spot them?" Broster wheeled around to the chart. Nothing indicated. According to it, there was no planet ahead of them, no spaceships behind them. He muttered something, then hurried across to the side ports, swung out the periscopic plates, stared anxiously to their rear. There were at least a dozen of the red bodies moving along in their wake. Large, all of them, and near. Ships almost as great as the Astrolite. Ships that looked dangerous. "They're close," he grated. "Too damn close. I don't like it." "Neither did I. I was wondering why I didn't do something when I saw them in the port," Arundel exclaimed. Broster jumped to the controls, pulled the lever that should shunt the ship to one side. But as the nose turned away and the great mass of her began slowly to describe a long arc in relation to her former course, another exclamation came from Kendall. "They're spreading out to stop us!" Broster cursed, reset the course. The planet was dead ahead now. "Trapped!" he fumed. "The red planet ahead of us, and those ships behind us. What do they want?" "It might be well to stop," Dr. Seward put in. "They might want to look us over, nothing more. Unless we arouse suspicion by resisting now." "And they might steal the ship under our noses too," protested Arundel. Broster shook his head. "There cannot be a question of letting unknown intelligences enter this craft or hold it. We can't afford to take chances, even if the notion that other world dwellers are necessarily enemies is silly. We've got to assume that everything we see is dangerous until proven harmless or friendly. Those are our first orders. Do not surrender the ship." "Then we run for it?" asked Seward. "We do. Our offensive weapons may be better than theirs, but it's another chance we're not taking. The very fact that we're outnumbered makes retreat the order of the day." "Look there!" exclaimed Arundel. "They're beaming past us." One of the strange, oval, multi-ported, oddly ornamented crimson craft had just shot a red beam alongside of the Astrolite, not touching it, but passing by, as if to show that, whenever they cared, this fleet could annihilate the intruder. Then all the other ships surrounding them began to flash beams, crossing and crisscrossing all about them, save in front. "Look," exclaimed Kendall. "You can see those beams as if they were in air." "Marvellous and impossible," groaned Seward. "We've run into a swarm of impossibilities today. Some philosopher once remarked that in eternity everything was possible. In fact, everything that could possibly happen has happened. It looks as if we're running into bits of that now. I should have taken my daughter's advice and let a younger man come this trip." "It may be impossible, but it's so," broke in Broster, "and deadly. We're getting out of here fast." He turned to the controls, and a moment later the astrolite began to accelerate. There was a limit to the speed they could reach, as they would have to shunt again soon to keep from smashing against the red planet. Unless... "Why not?" asked Arundel, following Broster's evident thoughts. "They apparently want us to land on the planet. So we do go for it, then shunt aside at the last minute." At first it seemed as if the astrolite would leave the others behind, but it was soon apparent that the unknown ships could keep up with her, in fact, were closing in. There was one pursuer behind them that seemed to Kendall, as he watched through the lens, almost to be upon them. It was, he knew, some half-mile away in reality. He could see the curiously pitted nose of the craft, note the weirdly streamlined mass. He observed, with astonishment, a little piece of wire seemingly flying loose from a bearing on one of the strange ships, which was streaming off behind as if in a stiff breeze. Yet space about them was empty. "Look out," called Seward from the forward scope. "There's more of them." Coming around the planet from behind, spreading out along the side as if to form a welcoming arch, were more of the weird ships. "That ties it," exclaimed Broster. "We'll never be able to pass the planet. It's either land or crash." "Then we crash," came the response. "Man the guns," yelled Broster. "Let's see how many we can take with us before we go." The three others swung in the various weapons and trained them on the surrounding ships. Explosion torpedo cannon, twin rays for electric jolting compromised the types of offensive guns. They were getting very close to the planet now, and it seemed as if the red ships were expecting the astrolite to slow down, for their beams shot occasionally in front of the Earth ship. The carmine bulk of the planet loomed up over most of the view now. It was too late to shunt aside. "Fire!" No sound, no roar of explosions. They watched eagerly for results, but there were none. Not a single torpedo appeared to have hit its mark. Not a single twin ray seemed to bathe the surrounding ovoids. They fired again. Kendall swore. The course of one torpedo was a stimulus. He watched it, saw its dark mass approach the nose of one of the vessels behind. Then he swears he saw it strike and disappear. Firing was useless. These ships were invulnerable to their weapons. Broster looked up, bracing himself. "Stand by to crash!" The force stopped everything, turned to look at each other for a moment in silence. In a few seconds more, they would simply cease to exist. No pain, no hours of lingering agony trapped in the wreckage. At the speed they were going, the entire ship would be volatilized, would fuse into a molten glowing mass. They turned again to the plates to look for a last time at the universe around them. For 6 years they had travelled away from Earth, far, far beyond any point man had ever dreamed of reaching. They were almost to the point where the order to turn back would have been given. Much had been learned. Now it would be lost. Broster gave a full acceleration. They saw the planet seemingly leap toward them, saw cloud blanks flick past them. A great flat plain of ruddy rock, a dread expanse of barren granite. In this, the veriest fragment of a second, then a momentary shock, as if each man had received an electrical jolt, a sudden flash of intolerable red. Darkness. The Earthmen blinked their eyes. They were in the ship, unharmed. They stood at their post in the same position as before, and about them the black of far space and the shining points of the star-studded Milky Way. Kendall gazed into the lens of the rear port, beckoning to the others. The red planet was already a small crimson disk behind them, passing into oblivion as they accelerated onward, outward. Broster laughed. "It's all clear now. Why the space charts seemingly did not function, why our weapons were useless, and why we were not killed, and why their beams could be seen in space, added Seawood. Because they weren't in space. They were in the air of another universe. It was all an illusion, explained Seawood. The ships, the planet, everything. That is why none of these things registered on the space chart. There were no gravity waves emanating from them because they were not there. Broster leaned back in his chair. We've all known that there were many universes beside ours, separated from us by the fourth-dimensional space-time sheet. That was demonstrated by Marilus centuries ago. Laboratory experiments have produced images of other planets. All this was just such an image. The space-time envelope must have been a little warped at this point, enough so as to let part of the waves emanating from the atoms of that section to pass through to our universe, and permit waves emanating from the atoms of our universe to pass through to them. We were able to see the red rays of their spectrum, nothing else. They saw us as a violet ship, but that was all. Then, put in Kendall, that's why they seem to be shooting rays at us. Right. We appear to them, in their world, as suddenly as they appear to us in space. It was a double mirage. At one end of the warp, they and their planet suddenly appear in what the instruments show to be empty space. At the other end, we appear out of nowhere, a strange ship headed for their planet. And it must have seemed to them that we went right through their planet too. That planet of theirs, by the way, must be a tremendous one, many times the mass and density of Jupiter, is probably what causes the space warp. What? Exclaimed Kendall. You mean that thing's a permanent institution in space? Certainly. Then let's go back and have a good look. Check, agreed Broster. We'll give their fleet and their planet the jitters again, laughed Seawood as he prepared the plates for special photos.
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. Cogito, Ergo, Sum by John Foster West. Originally published in Fantastic Universe, March 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. I think, therefore I am. That was the first thought I had. Of course, not in the same symbols, but with the same meaning. I awakened, or came alive, or came into existence suddenly. At least my mental consciousness did. Here am I thought. But what am I? Why am I? Where am I? I had nothing to work with except pure reason. I was there because I was not somewhere else. I was certain I was there, and that was the extent of my knowledge at the moment. I looked about me. No, I reasoned about me. I was surrounded by nothingness, by black nothingness, a vacuum. Immense distances away I could detect light, or rather, I could perceive waves of force passing around me which originated as points vast distances away, vast in relation to my position in the nothingness. There were waves of force all about me, varying in frequency. The nothingness was alive with waves of force, travelling parallel and tangential to each other, without seeming to interfere one with another. I measured them, differentiated between them, and finished with the task in a matter of seconds. How could I do it? It was one of the capabilities I was created with. What was I? I perceived the waves of force. I perceived great quantities of mass, solid, liquid, gas, whirling in vacuum, mass built up out of patterns of basic force. I searched my own being, analyzed myself. I was not gas.
I was not solid. I was not even force. Yet I existed. I could reason. I was a beginning, a sudden beginning, and I had duration, because I knew that time had elapsed since the moment I awakened, though I had no means of telling how much time, or of even naming the period. Could I really be pure reason? Can reason exist? Can rational entity exist without a groundwork of matter, or at least of force? It could. It must. I was rational entity, and I existed. Yet I could find nothing of force, nothing to occupy space about myself. For all I could ascertain, I might have covered a one-dimensional point in eternity, or I might have been spread throughout vast distances. From this reasoning, I concluded that rational entity might occur either as some force unlike that of all natural phenomena in space, or as some combination of these forces at the moment beyond my own power to analyze, even detect. I finished with that for the time being. How did I come into being? I discarded the question as unanswerable temporarily. What was I before that instant I suddenly reasoned? Cogito, ergo sum. I could not say. How did I know I even existed, really? Obviously, because I was capable of rational thought. But what was thinking? First, it was perceiving and accepting my own existence. Beyond that, it was recognizing the dark nothingness around me and the forces it contained. I had to exist. But how did I know nothingness was right? And how did I know its darkness was right? And how did I know the waves of force were waves and force? And how did I know matter was matter, and that I was none of these? Symbols, I reasoned. I'm thinking in symbols. I could not reason without symbols. Therefore, I could not exist as I am without symbols to think with. Yet, whose symbols were they? Where and how did I come by them? I could think back clearly to the instant of my creation, yet I had not invented the symbols in the interim of my existence, nor had they been given to me. What then? They were part of me when I came alive in this universe, had been invented some other time and elsewhere by someone else, or by what I was before I became the entity of reason I now was. Then that first flash of perception in nothingness was not spontaneous. There was something behind it. I was something before that moment, in another era of time, perhaps a creature of substance. But what? I concentrated. I remembered the symbol Mal. I was, or had been, an entity Mal. Were there others back there, somewhere? There must have been, must be yet. Was I the only Mal who metamorphosed into this state of rational entity? Surely not. Yet I could contact no other rationale around me as far away as I could probe. How far was that? How could I know? Was it far enough to reach the other Mals, or were they scattered thinly throughout infinity around me like the flecks of mass? I was suddenly ill. The symbol malaise came to me as the proper description of my malady. I grew dizzy with my sickness. I wished to regurgitate, to cast off this cold, frightening sensation. Yet I was provided with no physical means of doing it. It filled me throughout all my thinking. It was I. I thought to exist. I thought depression, sickness. Therefore I was the malady, and it was a hell of malcontent beyond symbolical description. What was wrong with me? I was frightened. I was concerned for my existence here alone. What was it called? The idea shimmered there on the fringe of perception, then fairly leaped into my consciousness. Existing alone as pure reason was worse than no existence, was worse than dying or never having been at all. I need another Marl. To exist happily, I must have at least one other Marl to communicate with, to share my thoughts, to share my being. Is this a necessity, a condition peculiar to me as I am, as reason? Or is it a condition that came across the barrier with me from that other state? It must be the latter. An entity of pure reason, having come into existence as reason, would need nothing but himself. Why? Because he would be without emotion. I am emotional, I thought. I am entity of almost pure reason, but I have inherited emotion from my previous state. It is a disorder of thought, but it can be a pleasant disorder when the emotion is the right one, or, if unpleasant, when satisfied. But I could not have emotions as I am now. They are cortical responses, or are supposed to be. What is cortical? No, they are a sort of illogical reasoning, nothing physical. The rest eluded me. I am lonely, I thought. Loneliness stems from fear, and fear is a basic emotion. I am very lonely. I have been lonely for a long time, bringing it with me here. I would rather sate my loneliness than live to eternity, than know all there is to know. What can quell my loneliness? Another like me? Another Marl, whatever a Marl is? I must find another Marl. I began to search. I darted frantically about space like a frightened thing, though I could perceive no movement. I knew I passed from one area of space to another, because I could measure slight changes in the position of the stars about me. I knew the points of lights were stars. There was duration. I could not know how much. Eternity? A split second? But at last I discovered another like me. No, almost like me, but another Marl. The other entity had less of reason, more emotion. It was frightened and lonely. The Marl's whole existence was that of sickness, of loneliness, which is fear. The Marl was darting about madly, seeking a thing like itself. What was it, like me, but different? As I came in, I measured our similarity and differences. Rationally, we were identical, or almost so. Emotionally, we were different, vastly different. Marls appear to exist as rationale and emotion, I reasoned. Beyond that I cannot go. The other Marl perceived me, darted frantically toward me, then slowed. We came together, touched like two cautious fish meeting in a dark pool and touching mouths to substantiate identical species. The other Marl was satisfied with my identity. It leaped frantically at me, raced around me, through me, finally stopped, pervading me, while vibrating in sheer relief and happiness. I felt the great fear-loneliness in the other Marl begin to recede, and in its place came an almost overpowering euphoria. It was contentment, and it stemmed from the basic emotion, love. I knew this at once. I suddenly realized that I too was relieved, that I was no longer sick with fear-loneliness. It was good, this existing of the other within me, or simultaneously with me, or was it I within the other? It sated our fear emotion and created a love euphoria. "I am happy I found you," I communicated. "I was lonely for another Marl." "You are a Marl?" The other hesitated, thinking. "No, I am Pat. I am different from you, but it is chiefly emotional. It is good." "You are a Pat," I returned in disappointment. I had hoped to find another Marl. "Don't be disappointed," the Pat soothed. "We are alike, really. Almost so. Like flame and gas are both substance, yet different. We are two types of the same thing. I am no longer frightened. I am no longer lonely. You are good for me." I was relieved because I wanted to be. I believed the other Marl, no, the Pat, because I wanted to believe. I did not bother to rationalize. I felt elation. "Then in that other time, that other place we both belonged to, a common group with another name?" I suggested. "I believe so," the Pat answered. "How was it when you came awake?" I asked. "Can you remember?" "I think so. I recall I was born here in fright because it was all wrong. I was not in my natural state, so it was not right." The Pat paused to think. "I remember there was great speed, and I was born in fright. Were you?" "No," I answered. "I was not frightened at first, and I was never frightened to the degree you were. I was mostly lonely, which is related to fear. But when I first conceived my existence here, I was coolly logical. I awakened reasoning, realizing that I existed." "I suppose it has to do with our emotional differences," the Pat beside me, or with me, or within me, communicated. "Do you recall where in space you came from?" I asked. I must have been doubting my existence at first so intensely I did not observe. You seem to have taken your own being for granted. Thus you were, perhaps, more observant." I think so." The Pat hesitated, and I knew it was observing the stars around us. "Yes. Come with me. I think I know where." I stayed with the Pat, a part of it, and we lurched through space. Rather, we ceased to exist at one point in space and existed in another. How far? Distances meant nothing. "It was here," the Pat informed me finally. Something was wrong here. The interweaving waves of force were all wrong. There was a disorder, a great cancer in space. The waves interfered with the progress of each other all along a great barrier. It was not natural, not like it was elsewhere. "Something is wrong with the waves of force crossing this area. They interfere with each other. New forces are created. Do you detect it?" I communicated. "I feel it," the Pat answered. "It is a sickness in space, like our loneliness." I knew the comparison was ridiculous, but I let it pass. "You said you came alive at great speed. I could have been travelling too. We must have plunged into this barrier. It seemed to me that emotions must originate in a physical being. Perhaps reason could be free, but not emotion. I don't know, but I have a theory. I believe our physical selves still exist somewhere in space. The barrier, perhaps, interfered with the normal functioning of our mental equipment. We exist at one point in space, and we are thinking, experiencing emotions at another point. It's as if our minds are broadcasting our thoughts and emotions far away from our physical selves. Either that, or our rationales were torn free and only our emotions are broadcast. Does that sound logical?
Yes, the Pat agreed. I believe that is the answer.
I felt that the Pat was pleased with my theory, that it greatly admired my reasoning. I also perceived that it had no idea what I meant by the explanation. I did not mind. You said you were moving at great speed, I continued. Can you remember the line, the direction you were travelling in? The Pat hesitated only a moment.
Yes. You perceive the star cluster there, the triangular one? My heading was in that direction, but it was changing fast.
Then we could find nothing by travelling toward the triangular cluster?
No, I was moving in an arc in the direction of the distorted square cluster there. Do you see it?
Yes, I answered, knowing her use of the word see was unconscious. That is Cetus.
Cetus?
The Pat was startled.
How do you know that?
I don't know. The name came to me. It seemed right to call it that.
It's all so frightening.
I had no time for pampering our emotions, though I was at great peace with the Pat so near me. Time might prove vital. Neither would it do any good to travel in the direction of Cetus, I said.
No, the Pat communicated. If there is any object of matter or force I was a part of in that other existence travelling through space, it is in an arc. The best we can do is take an arbitrary direction between the triangular cluster and the one called Cetus, and hope to intercept the object, the other part of me, whatever it is.
Come with me, I ordered. I discovered the object of mass hurtling through space before the Pat did. It was symmetrical and metallic. I tore myself away from my companion and darted to meet it. I discovered it was a shell, a hollow thing, and I passed inside. There was a room there. There were projections and circles of transparent matter. I experienced the symbol, dials. There were two other creatures seated close to the dials, things of matter, and their substance was protoplasm. But there was no rationale present in either of them. I examined the living matter of the smaller one swiftly. Organs seemed poised in a suspended state. The creature I observed, housed in a protective shell, seemed paralyzed or dead. I remembered the word dead. Then the Pat was with me again.
I feel something, Marl. I am frightened. What are they, those things there?
They seem to be... I stopped communicating. The Pat had disappeared. The thing of protoplasm nearest to me was moving, but I was no longer interested. I remember the Pat had touched the upper extremity of the creature and had vanished, had ceased to be. The old sickness was back. I was lonely. I wanted the other entity. I did not wish to exist without the Pat. I darted frantically about the metal shell, here and there, searching. Where was the Pat? I screamed for it. I thought, Pat, as far away as I could reach, but there was no reaction, no response at all. In my frenzy, I was back beside the creatures of protoplasm before I realized it, near the one I had not yet examined. Perhaps they took her, I thought. It was not logical, but it was a hope. Hope is emotional. I was becoming more emotional than rational. I touched the larger of the two creatures experimentally, moved cautiously inside it, searching. Suddenly I was seized by a great force, an inexorable power that grasped me and wrenched me, tearing me from the point in space I had occupied a moment before. My perception blurred, but I was not frightened. Without the pat, I did not care what happened. I was intensely curious. So this is how it is, I reasoned in a flash, to cease to be. And I ceased to be. Marlowe shook his head. I must have dozed, he thought. He glanced at the chronometer on the console ahead. No, only a minute or two had elapsed since the last time he had checked. "Sleepyhead, wake up and live." He looked to his right. Pat sat in the navigator's seat, smiling at him. "I didn't sleep, honestly," he protested. "We hit some sort of barrier back there. It knocked me out for a moment. I had the damnedest impression." "Remember what you promised." She swiveled the seat about to face him. "No more scientific lectures on the mysteries of space, or I'll return to Earth. You know my poor brain can't absorb it." "You win," he grinned, running calloused fingers through his greying crew cut. He leaned forward and kissed her briefly. How did an old space hermit like me ever win a flower garden bride in the first place? They laughed together, and he felt secure within the metallic shell surrounding them, no longer alone.
The end. Do you want to know how you can help save more of the forgotten stories of futures past? Visit storiesoffuturespast.substack.com/about.